Today on Future Forward, tech and COVID.
Contact tracing. Is surveillance worth the risk?
Then AT&T is at war with freeconference.com.
And how tech provides the bridge to a solution.
I'm Stephen Rosenbaum.
And I'm Alexis Scordato. Let's launch.
And launch we shall. And by the way, we have Glen coming along to talk to us about IEEE technology and some editorial a little bit later in the pod. But first, it does seem like this is a different week. I mean, the terrible news is still terrible. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. But people are starting to think about, how all these pieces fit together and what it all means. There is some drumbeat about, let's reopen. I'm not in that camp, by the way.
I mean, a few weeks ago, we're going to reopen by Easter. Remember that?
Yeah, well, yes, I do. But let's just we've got really interesting content. Part of what I hope that our listeners feel like is that when they come to the podcast, they get from us a different take on some of these things, and for that, we try and come up with some different things to talk about. So let's just begin at the beginning, if you will, although I don't know if it's the beginning, about the Apple and Google coronavirus tracking system. It's easy to not pay attention to the complexity of this story, but it's not a plug and play answer, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, anytime you take any two large tech giants and they say that they're going to do something together, that is always a recipe for complexity.
And is it just because they use different language and different platforms and different tech, or is it?
I mean, it's opportunity, and this also is scary, right? So I think it's a combination of cultures clashing, technology being complex and tough to integrate, but you think about the resources that these two organizations wield. And if we are going to have a shot at implementing a tech solution to contact tracing, I mean, these are the two I'd probably bet on.
All right, so I'm going to ask you to help me understand this buzzword, because I confess to not fully understanding it.
Contact tracing?
Yeah.
So I think that every single phone has Bluetooth technology behind it. And so you can imagine that if I were to be diagnosed with COVID, and then within, I don't know, a week, I would, even if I'm quarantining, right? But then I go to this, or social distancing. If I go to the store, I live with my boyfriend, I walk around the block, right? I think the way that most people would sort of trace right now is to do an extensive interview, right, with me, to say, where have you been, who have you been in the room with, right, where are your whereabouts? And so what contact tracing can do with Apple and Google is they can basically find a way to capture the data that your phone is already transmitting, and then basically use the coordinates of your data, almost like your GPS technology, to then actually answer the question of where you've been within a certain period of time.
Okay, so I'm going to, not on you, because we're friends, but kind of on the universe, call bullshit on that. Because everyone's saying, oh, but the data is anonymous. But wait, either it's anonymous or it's not anonymous. If you walk into a supermarket and then a week later, some database can say, here's the names of 50 people that were within 10 feet of that that location at that time. That's the opposite of anonymous. That's surveillance.
So my understanding is it's when that data becomes personally identifiable. And so if you can imagine billions of data points sort of being captured in real time, then what Apple and Google, their challenge is to basically say, we only want to be able to reference these data points when Alexa comes forward and says, I've tested positive, and then I would have to sort of then they'd sort of have to reference me in that system.
I'm sorry. We've done this show for a long time, and generally when I'm not smart, you're smart, and so I get it. Or at least, but I really like I don't understand how anonymous data becomes unanonymous.
No, I mean it's not anonymous in the sense like it's just it's numbers, right? So if my phone is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 10, and then your phone is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 10, then that's just like in the database. Then all of a sudden there's a use case where we have to identify what happened to phone 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 10, and now all of a sudden I am the person associated with that number. No?
Yeah, I
think like, oh, we're gonna follow Alexa around. It's like there's just all of the data, the phone data, and then they're gonna start to narrow it down once there's a case that they then actually have to trace.
Okay, so what's the difference legally between Apple or Google saying, hey, Alexa was just in this car dealership for an hour and 45 minutes. I'm pretty sure she's in the market for a new car. I'm going to show her a car ad. Or then she went to her cousin's house. Then she went and saw 5 other, I guess I'm trying to understand.
They have to work out, which is the consent piece, the consent piece, and then the deletion of the data afterwards.
So does this require the federal government to give them some special? No, what they would do is they would push an updated version of their terms of service and ask me to accept it.
Right. Yes. So it has to. They have to get explicit consent from the user in order to do this.
But they could say, if you say no, we're not going to let you use our operating system.
Well, I think in order for this to work, then we as a general public have to basically surrender privacy.
Okay, so listeners, the reason there was a long pause after that was because Alexa just said I've been reading about this all day for this podcast, trying to understand if it says potentially, because there's no unringing. I guess, look, I'm thinking back to 9/11, and I'm thinking back to, the Patriot Act. And I'm thinking back to all of the stuff that happened after 9/11 where the government raced in and said, listen, we're under attack, special circumstances, you're going to hand your privacy over, we'll give it right back to you. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, now it's 18, 19 years later. Turns out, yeah, not so fast. They really, none of that stuff got unrung that bell. So here's the next question, and then we'll move on because I know we have a lot of things to talk about. But I wanted to dig into this one because you've answered the question, which is when people say reopen the country, like what they don't understand is there's a transaction that's going to take place on the other side of that ask. That's going to be, if we know where all the people who have tested positive and are communicable are or have been, then maybe we can continue to control the virus while at the same time, quote, allowing you to go to Target.
Yes. So it's a test and trace, and it's sort of rinse and repeat until you can actually say with certainty that, places and people don't have it.
So there was an article in The Atlantic called "The Technology That Could Free America from Quarantine," written by Derek Thompson. Came out on April 7th. So, a couple of days ago. And this is, what I found striking about it was that the headline was so conversational. Like, hey, we might have this solved.
It's never just the technology. It's the values and the people behind it, the users.
And while I'm at it on a little bit of a soapbox, the other thing that's coming up is this, well, the people that are potentially at risk should be quarantined and everyone else should be able to go back to work. And I was trying to figure out this morning, so if just one potential risk factor is diabetes, just as an example, that's 32 million Americans. So, and then if you put, lung disease and heart disease, everyone talks about pre-existing conditions like it's like, well, but that's not me. And then when you're honest among people, I mean, in a workplace, 2/3 of the people have something.
And these choices are going to be dictated by people who are in positions of privilege. It is the most vulnerable populations who will not have a say. Think about people who are homeless. Think about undocumented workers, right? There's no way to actually exclude them from ridding the world of COVID, because unless they're actually also accounted for, then it's never going to go away. And so the how is going to be decided not by them, even though they're constituents in this.
All right, so let me just read the first paragraph of the Atlantic article, because I think it says it in movie style. Like, it says it's a cool fall day in September 2020. You have a bottle of wine in your hand, and you're sliding into the front seat of your car to drive to a dinner party with close friends who you haven't seen in a long time. Now, here's where it picks up. As you're pulling into the neighborhood, you feel your phone buzz. It's an alert from the new agency overseeing the coronavirus outbreak. On the lock screen, you can read the words, "Be advised." Your heart sinks as you unlock your phone and read, "We have determined that in the past few days, you may have interacted with somebody who has recently tested positive for COVID-19. There's no need to panic, but for the sake of your family, your friends, and neighbors, we are relying on your support. As soon as possible, can you please... ... so many, hi, we're the government, we're here to help. Like, this is the government who theoretically was giving away trillions of dollars to the populace and is now 3 weeks in and can't cut a check.
Right.
But we want them...
Although they are processing the small business relief funds very, very quickly. It's almost the exact opposite.
Is that true?
Yeah. I know people who have filed and they didn't even get a yes or a no. It just hit their bank accounts. Really?
First time. That's fascinating. Okay. Well, that's good to know. So I sense this may be somewhat generational between us. Among people I talk to, like, there's a certain sense that, like, the government already tracks you and knows your data and knows where you are and listens to your phone calls. This is just another system to track another thing. I mean,
yeah.
Are you that sanguine about it?
Yeah, I'm sort of just like, I have nothing to hide, so whatever.
I bet that's not true.
What?
I bet that's not true.
Oh, that I have stuff to hide?
Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, I think I've always, and it's, I don't know how much of an outlier I am, but I definitely skewed towards this notion that, like, I should just be okay surrendering everything. Like, even when it comes to HIPAA compliance, like, if for some reason all of my medical records were, like, on Google, I don't really think I would be that bothered.
So what would happen if you got an email from your insurance company and it said, "Hey, Alexa, we've noticed that you go to the gym twice a week and your rates are based on that, and for the last 3 weeks you haven't gone. So there's a rate increase coming unless you go back to the gym."
Yeah.
Because from an actuarial standpoint, that's a perfectly reasonable piece of math.
Totally, and I'm totally a believer in, like, preventative health and.
But preventative, anyway, different pod.
Topic,
different
yeah.
pod. All right. So the Atlantic article scares the hell out of me, doesn't scare you. The Google and Apple playing nice together, you think is in the same category of maybe a tech problem, but not a privacy problem.
Yep.
Let's get to the last one.
This article was tough for me. It actually made me really sad.
This is the New York Times Magazine article, "Restarting America means people will die, so when do we do it?" Made you sad, why?
I mean, it's just, there's no easy solve to this, and there's so many variables and unknowns, and so I just, here I am, it's 60 degrees and sunny in New York, and it's a day when I would normally be with my family, celebrating Easter Sunday, and just there's sort of a trade-off and a price to pay, and sort of just thinking like, what are our priorities? Is it opening the schools first? Is it opening certain businesses? Like this notion of large gatherings, sporting events, concerts, etc. Like speculation that that's not even probable in the fall, and that maybe at earliest it's fall 2021. That's just, it's sad for me because it feels like there's a huge aspect of life that's on hold.
So I found myself, as I was reading this, thinking about 9/11. And in the weeks after 9/11, there was a big concert at Madison Square Garden, support firefighters, first responders concert. And Pam and I went. And, I just remember as we walked in, looking around at all these people in one place and thinking, was this smart? Like, was this really where, like it, we, for a moment, for a half second, we felt like, boy, we've made ourselves even more of a target than living in New York. And then we were kind of like, fuck it, we're good, we're in. And I do think that there are a lot of people that feel that way about, I mean, maybe until COVID strikes, there's got to be some degree of separation at which it starts to feel real to you. I mean, when it's a family member or when you know someone who's suffered from it and then died from it, then maybe you stop saying, that's a thing that, that's a thing in New York and in San Francisco. Like right now, there's a Facebook debate raging among a couple of people I know, and there is kind of a, there's a very strong, just open it back up, herd immunity, drumbeat. And these are the same people who also say, oh, and by the way, global warming's bullshit too. So I'm like, oh, I get it. You just don't believe in anything. Like,
right.
Anyway, so I found this article very hard to read, but really helpful for me because it wasn't either side. It wasn't left versus right. It wasn't crazy Trumpism versus, keep the government, keep the country locked down forever till we're all healthy. It was, I thought the debate was refreshing in its complexity.
Right. No, absolutely. But and I think, yeah, but all roads, all perspectives though still led to, okay, no matter what the path forward is, we're still going to lose people, and it's going to take some time.
All right. So let's move to chapter 2. So chapter 2 is this crazy AT&T freeconferencecall.com battle.
How did you even hear about this? Because I feel like I hadn't heard about this until you sent me the link.
I'm always looking for outlier stories. Like, look, the terrible thing about the COVID story, as a journalist, is there are all kinds of people making money. I mean, there's all kinds of lawyers. There's going to be all kinds of lawsuits. There's going to be all kinds of malpractice. There's going to be all kinds of legal. A perfect example of that is, General Motors did a $500 million deal to make respirators that aren't going to be available for 7 months. And all I could think about was, there's going to be a warehouse full of unnecessary respirators that we spent $500 million building for the, That being said, though, I did think that the AT&T 1-8 free conference call story was unique in its battle because, truthfully, I have no idea how, or at least didn't, how free conference call makes a living. I mean, I don't pay them.
I had no idea. I mean, but I've used it. Have you?
Yeah, not so much lately.
Years, right? Not lately, but yeah, I used to use it all the time.
So it has to do with the way free conference call routes their calls through networks that they get kickbacks from through a bit of FCC legislation that goes back a long time. But it's called access stimulation. But why would AT&T be picking this battle now?
Oh my goodness, that I don't know. I mean, it's opportunist, right? It's just like, maybe it's just like there's, if you're gonna seize the moment, or do something unprecedented or try to take advantage of just, oh, things are crazy, we have to move fast, then maybe now's the right time?
I don't know. I mean, I assume with all things legal, things are, the lawyers wrote the document 7 months ago, and then it went through review, and then it had to get filed, and then they had to get a court date. So, like, no, I don't think this is, unless I misread the article, I didn't get the sense that this was something that that happened out of the blue. I think it's more that the timing was unfortunate, and it was rolling through the system, and it does seem to me in reading the article. By the way, as every week, we'll put the links in the show notes. It does seem to me like 1-800 conference call business model might be on thin ice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible that it's just bad timing all around. But I could see I'd be curious how their business has been impacted by sort of other communication technologies,
like
right?
Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which also has a dial-in feature. Like if you don't want to be, if you don't want to use internet to get onto a Zoom call, you can use a.
Yeah, but nobody really does that, do they?
You know what? If you're like in a car in a remote area, for sure you're gonna do that. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on, because Glenn is going to join us from IEEE and has like a whole passel of stories to talk about. So here we go. I'm going to go grab Glenn. All right, Glenn, thank you for joining us. And I pulled a couple of stories off the website, the Spectrum website, because they struck me as, the things we're all trying to balance, which is, so let's just start with the quantum computer story. Secretly, the reason that I read Spectrum right now diligently is because I want to hear that there's some magic piece of technology or medical breakthrough that hasn't yet made its way into the mainstream press, but it's literally going to be like a game changer for this. And I guess as I read this is the Mark Anderson story, as I read it, I thought, well, that makes sense. I mean, I know just enough about quantum computing to be dangerous, and I thought, this is a data processing problem. All the COVID stuff is a data processing problem, and theoretically, this story is one of a couple we're going to talk about. Should be the good news that if they get it right, could get to data faster. Am I being too optimistic?
I think you might be.
Oh.
Well, I do think that this is a pandemic, and this is a disease that we are going to beat with technology. I don't have any doubt about that. But I don't think that technology is going to be quantum computing. So I was pretty excited when I first saw the headline on this story that, the gist of the story is that this company called D-Wave, which is the only company that is marketing what it calls a quantum computer, but which some people don't agree is really actually a quantum computer. But let's put that aside. A Canadian company called D-Wave is marketing a device, they have been for a number of years, that they're calling a quantum computer. And it's a very interesting computer. And when I saw that they had made time available through this cloud arrangement for researchers working on COVID, free of charge, I was very excited. I thought this was going to, maybe they were going to be using quantum computing to tackle this extremely difficult problem called protein folding. So, with the idea, a lot of what's going on here involves proteins. I mean, proteins are the things that make our body go. I mean, they're complicated molecules. They're involved in everything, including immunity and response to disease and pathogens and everything else. So, protein folding is a very, very difficult challenge. It's a computing challenge that's kind of beyond conventional computers. So when I saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to be using quantum computing to finally tackle this thing. But apparently, no. The kind of applications they're talking about are scheduling nurses and resources and modeling and simulation and things like that, which are big challenges, but as far as I know, they're being handled by conventional computers now, and the computing community isn't really complaining that, I mean, everyone would like more computing. So, that would be great. But, a lot of these researchers aren't familiar with the way you program a quantum computer, which is nothing like how you program a conventional computer. So other people have made available their expertise to help out in this. But, I think this is a great story for us. I think it's fascinating. I think it was a really interesting move on the part of D-Wave. But, I have to say, I'm not looking at this to be the thing that really gets us, past this horrible situation into whatever the next phase is in our struggle against COVID.
All right, so let's move on to a piece of to the patch, because that seemed like, and again, part of what I dug up were stories that said, here's this thing that already exists, but it's being repurposed, and we might already have something that we could use toward COVID, and that was the story that was the Tekla Perry story about the sweat sensing patch. And
that's really interesting,
right?
Yeah. So the backstory here is that these researchers have developed this patch that you actually put on your skin, and it monitors in real time. It monitors chemicals in your sweat, so you can tell a lot about what a person is going through physiologically from their sweat. So these were initially aimed at athletes, for example. So, by studying an athlete's sweat, you can tell an awful lot about how hydrated the athlete is. And so this work was, by the way, this all started with work from a researcher in the Midwest named John Rogers. And he's been a longtime source of Tekla's, and he was the one who kind of got this idea and really pushed this technology. So, and it has had a lot. He's been working on this for a really long time, and he's gotten some real traction with some companies, including Estee Lauder and Gatorade. And Gatorade's interest in particular was athletes, monitoring athletes. You put this patch, they don't even know they're wearing it. You put this patch on them. It's about 2 or 3 inches long. It's sort of a oblong shape. And by monitoring what's going on with their sweat, you can tell an awful lot about their levels of hydration and just in other aspects of their health and performance. So when COVID occurred, he suddenly realized that he and his researchers, they realized that these patches could be put to great use in monitoring COVID patients. In particular, for reasons that no one understands, a small but relatively large percentage of COVID patients experience this viral pneumonia, which leads to, in the worst cases, it leads to a huge immune response, which is called a cytokine storm. So this cytokine storm has been implicated in many of the deaths. So what happens in short is that cytokines are these molecules that are in the body, and you see them in response to infection. So they're part of the immune response. But again, for reasons that no one really understands, in some of these cases, in serious medical cases in general, there's a runaway immune response. And in effect, the patient dies from that. The immune system goes haywire, it swamps the body, and that is a major contributing factor to death. So one of the hallmarks of this runaway immune response is this cytokine storm. And it turns out that these sweat patches can monitor the levels of cytokines. They're in the sweat in a proportion to their presence in the body. So you can actually, by using these patches, you can see in real time, because they're constantly on the body, so you can see at any given time what the level of cytokines are in the patient and whether there's a real cause for concern. So he and his colleagues have been working really hard to make this happen, because it would be like some sort of early warning system that a patient is going in this bad direction if they started seeing too many cytokines in the sweat.
Wow.
It's very powerful.
And there's not any other real-time monitoring of cytokines currently? There's no blood. Well, I don't even know how that works. I don't think I've ever seen in a hospital real-time blood analysis.
Well, actually, I want to just add one other thing, which is a different story we did. We did a different story a few days before that one about a company in New Jersey. The name escapes me, but there's a company in New Jersey that actually, before all this, developed a system that, in effect, filters a patient's blood of cytokines. So, so there was this idea that they call it a Brita filter for the blood. I mean, this is how we identified it. But so this company has actually created technology that would enable a patient who is experiencing this cytokine storm to have their blood filtered of these cytokines. And, again, it's a new company and a new medical process, but I think it's a small company too, so there isn't, right now there isn't a huge amount of this available to the medical community. But I mean, to my mind, that could show great promise to reducing the fatality rates of the disease.
So the last story, and this is the one that in some ways is to your point. I mean, the thing people I don't think about when they hear these stories is, if these patches were perfect and they passed some super fast FDA approval, or I guess it wouldn't be FDA. It still needs to be manufactured, packaged at scale, shipped to hospitals. Someone has to pay for it. People have to be trained on it. Like I mean, none of these things
have to become comfortable with it. They have to know what it does, what it can do, what it can't do. I mean, yeah, these things take time. Right. All that applies to this blood filtration system of cytokines too. It's,
which is why this last story, a rapid test for COVID-19 arrives via 20-year-old technology that already have in hospitals. I was like, okay, I'll put that in the good news category, because you don't have to deploy it. You just have to, I guess, is it reprogram it or?
This to my mind, really could make a difference. This is tremendously interesting stuff. So there's a company called Feud. They come out of Silicon Valley. They were started by a man named Kurt Peterson. And they basically, his specialty is microfluidics. And microfluidics are pretty much what you would think. It's technology. It's like microscale technology to manipulate fluids. So what Feud has done is they've created a machine that can do tests of many different sorts. But one of the kinds of tests it can do are these so-called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction tests. So PCR is this revolutionary biological technique and technology that was invented some years ago. It's basically a technique for taking a tiny amount of genetic material and making huge quantities of it. So that's really useful because, for example, you might remember the O.J. Simpson trial, where there was a lot of PCR came into the public consciousness in the O.J. Simpson trial because there was this genetic evidence. There was, tiny hairs and, tiny bits of dried skin or blood or this or that. So if you have a very small amount of biological matter, that evidence that you've collected, you need much more of that, of the genetic information in there to do tests, to know for sure what this genetic material matches. So PCR is this technique that was invented some years ago to make huge quantities of genetic material, DNA in particular, from a tiny quantity of it. So one of the things that PCR is used for is testing for COVID, for the various biomarkers of COVID. So again, this is a genetic disease, it's a genetic problem. So in order to detect the tiny bits of these biomarkers that may be present in a person that you're testing, you need to magnify it. And again, that's what PCR does. It magnifies it. So if you take this swab, if you swab a person's nostril or throat, there will be genetic material in there corresponding to the COVID, to the virus, but there probably won't be very much of it. So PCR is needed. That's the way the test works. PCR magnifies that hugely, and then you can get a result from that enormous quantity. So this, in effect, is what this Feud machine does. It automates the whole PCR process. So you can take your sample and put it into this machine, and it will go through all the PCR steps and all this other stuff automatically in about 45 minutes.
I have to say, one of the things that when I find myself yelling at the TV, which is more recently than in past months, one of the things that's frustrating is, as long as the testing is only being given to people that have symptoms, but we know that the disease is transmittable for days before you have symptoms. I mean, you don't have to be a math whiz to figure out that means that there are, hundreds of thousands of people wandering around that haven't been tested. Some of them are symptomatic, most of them aren't. There's no way you ever manage that until you get the testing ahead of the symptoms.
Yeah, and not only that, but even in addition to what you're saying, there's a whole group of people, and no one knows how big this group is, that contracts the disease and goes through the whole thing with almost no symptoms.
Yeah.
Which is really amazing and unbelievable. A friend of mine has a friend whose son got the disease, got COVID, and the only symptom he had was he lost his sense of smell and taste for about a week. And that was it. Never got the sore throat. And he was tested. He had the antibodies. He had the disease. He never had the sore throat. He never had the fever.
Wow.
Essentially, all he had was a week where he couldn't take. So
bizarre.
It really is.
How did he even get a test without extreme symptoms?
I believe that one of his roommates had it.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
He shared an apartment with 2 or 3 roommates in Manhattan.
All right. Well, we are out of time. I just want to say this to our listeners. If you're not bookmarking IEEE Spectrum and going there once every day or once every couple of days, I think you'll find the reporting. It's incredibly solid. It's remarkably apolitical and not judgmental. And I come away, now that I'm doing it on a daily basis, with when people are trying to argue in big, broad, brushes, I'm like, let's talk about some data. Here's some data. Here's the name of a product that's interesting. And then there was like, how did you find that? And I'm like, well, because I read.
What
anyway,
a concept.
Thank you guys. We will be back again next week with another edition of Future Forward. Until then, stay safe. Be well.
Bye. Bye, Steve. Bye.